Welcome to the Ethics Alliance conversation.
I thought I would focus today on the embedding part of the topic, so embedding values and principles, because values and principles are useless if they're not embedded. So embedding means that there has to be a change in the behaviour. I'm a pretty simple character, so when I think of behaviour change, it boils down to this. You can take extensive notes if you so wish, but I'm going to put something up on the whiteboard. Every day we turn up to work, whatever job function we're in, whether we're in finance or marketing or sales, human resources, whatever it happens to be, our job is to get people from point A to point B. Point A is what they're currently doing. Point B is what we'd like them to do. So in a marketing context, point A could be not clicking a button on our website, point B might be clicking a button. In this context, we're talking about point A, they're not behaving ethically, whatever that means. Point B is we would like them to. Agreed? So you can apply the A to B thought process to whatever your work is. The problem when we're trying to get people from point A to point B is we've been doing it wrong. Because, hands up, who learnt to be a human and how to influence other humans? No one had, well, a few of us had had formal training, that's excellent. Most of us haven't. We sort of grow up and we think, oh, well, I'm a human, I know what other humans do, so let me try and influence them that way. Anyone ever felt like they've been hitting their head up against a brick wall at work? Trying to get all hands should go up. Trying to get a staff member to do something, trying to get a stakeholder to behave in a particular way, a customer to do what you'd like them to do. It's because we've been making a few wrong moves. So the first is believing what people will do what they say they'll do. So this is gap number one, say versus do. What do I mean? Yes, I want to buy Australian, but then I find myself in the supermarket and the Italian tomatoes are on sale. Of course I'm going to buy Italian, I'll buy Australian next time. It's a trivial example, but it happens to us all. I say that I'm law-abiding. Do I ever speed? I'll turn the mics off and say yes. So there's a gap between what we say we're going to do and what we actually do. I experienced this as a product manager. We'd run lots of focus groups. What would make you... I was working for White Pages at the time, White Pages print directory, believe it or not. This was about 10 years ago. What would make you use the print directory more? Well, if you put a schedule of which weeks to put out the recycling bin in there, that would help. I'd flick to the book. This week it's green waste. Next week it's recycling. That would help. What do we do when we need to put the bin out? We look at our neighbours, right? These examples are around us all the time. We can't always assume that what people say they'll do, they'll do. This is a big problem when we're surveying people about ethical behaviour, when we're asking them, do you understand what's in that policy? Of course I do. Does it mean it will translate into behaviour? Not necessarily. So that's problem number one, the say versus do gap. Problem number two, we assume that people are rational. They're not rational. We have a superannuation industry based on the fact that we are not rational. Think about it. If we were rational from an economic perspective, we would all save for our retirement. We don't. It needs to be mandated. So people are not rational. In this context, what's another example? It's called moral licensing. When people, I love this study, people were, they went and bought some environmentally safe products. So they'd done an ethical thing. Then they were given an opportunity to steal, and they were more likely to. Why? It's moral licensing. I've done something good, so I can do something bad. So just if we are assuming that a good person will always do good things, we're going to set ourselves up for failure. The example I often use there is Lance Armstrong. How could he reconcile his own behaviour to himself, his cheating? Well, not only is he coming back from illness, but he's set up the, what was the foundation? The Live Strong. So I can live with myself, I'm a good person. Yeah, sorry, the microphone's blowing over like Docklands. So the second problem is we can't assume that people are rational. We need a different way of going about it. The third thing we overlook is the impact of the environment, which Bob knows so much more than I do about. But the environment shapes our decision making. Things like if chairs are in a circular formation, it promotes inclusiveness and consensus. If we've got an angular formation, it promotes uniqueness and isolation. That has big bearings on how people are going to behave. I was studying at Yale earlier in the year, and beautiful old buildings at Yale, except the School of Management, has anyone been? It's this glass building, right? I thought, oh, here we go. So cliche. Businesses, it's all about the steel and the glass. But this building was fascinating because it was constructed just after the Enron collapse. So they commissioned this building to be transparent, to signal to people within the building that that's what they wanted in behaviour. So we can look at how the environment shapes behaviour. So those are the three mistakes. We can't rely on what people tell us they'll do, we can't assume that they're rational, and we cannot underestimate the impact of the environment. Another example there, just as an aside, has nothing to do with this. People were given bowls and they said, scoop out as much ice cream as you like. Those that were given bigger bowls, 31% more ice cream. Bigger spoons, 14% more ice cream. So the environment shaped their behaviour. And these were nutritionists. I love that one. Okay, so how do we get people from A to B if we can't rely on the typical ways that we try and do this? This is the model that I have determined based on behavioural economics, drawn as a triangle. There are three barriers, 3 points of resistance. I don't know why I'm holding it back there, it's up here. Sorry about that. 3 points of resistance from getting people from point A to point B. The first is apathy. People will not change their behaviour if they cannot be bothered. I'm not interested in what you're suggesting. Ethics, schmethics, I don't care. Now, this is born out of the behavioural economics principle of System 1 and System 2. Has anyone heard of those systems? An example of those. You know when you're driving somewhere that is familiar to you, how you sometimes go, I don't even know how I got here. I wasn't even thinking. That's your System 1. That's your habits. That's your automatic processing. If you're driving somewhere that is unfamiliar to you, it's your System 2 driving the car. You know how you finish that journey and you're exhausted? That's your System 2. We use both throughout the day, but System 2 capacity is much smaller, so it wears out really quickly. So when we're trying to police our own actions, we're using what we call System 2. Most of the time, our habits, our natural behaviours are System 1. So what I mean by apathy is that people don't really like to think too hard. As soon as we make things complicated, like we've got massive policy documents on ethics, I'm not going to read that and I'm not going to change my behaviour. So the key here is to make sure that reward is greater than effort. Just think of that equation. I call it the effort versus reward equation. When effort is greater than reward, behaviour doesn't change. If effort is equal to reward, behaviour won't change. Reward has to be much greater than effort to be bothered. So effort versus reward. We can talk about elements of those as we go. The second part of that is making sure there's a short-term or an immediate benefit. So not only what's in it for me, but what's in it for me to change my behaviour now. So that's the first barrier, apathy. I'm not interested. The second is paralysis, known as the paradox of choice in behavioural economics. Too many options, I'm confused, I don't know what to do. You're giving me all of these different varieties of things, it's overwhelming, I'm not going to change my behaviour, it's easier to do nothing. I'll stick with the status quo. So here we have roles for defaults. So how do we default people to the ethical thing to do? And also one of the challenges with paralysis is that the research has shown that people tend to, when they have to choose an option that they have to justify to other people, they'll choose the option that is easiest to justify. So in a business context, that means it might not be the ethical option, but at least I can tell my boss why I did something. It brought in the revenue or whatever it happens to be. The third and final one, that will stop people from changing their behaviour is anxiety. So yes, I might be interested, so apathy is not a problem. Yes, I might know what I need to do, so decision paralysis isn't a problem. But I'm worried about committing to the action. I'm worried about what I have to give up in order to change my behaviour. And this is the principle of loss aversion. We're more scared of what we have to give up than what we have to gain. So an example here, if anyone watches tennis, is the first and second serve. Second serve, what changes? It's slower, isn't it? And it's more conservative, so we hit in the lines. Why? Last chance, something, the stakes have changed. I have something to lose. If loss aversion or anxiety wasn't at stake here, everyone would slam down that second serve as fast as the first because we'd be going for the win. But that's not how humans operate. We don't always go for the win, we go for the not loss. So anxiety. So in this context, why are people anxious about changing their behaviour from a non-ethical to an ethical behaviour? What does it mean for their tribe? What does it mean for the culture? What does it mean for me hitting my targets? Does it mean that I'm going to be scrutinised differently? So these are the three barriers we need to overcome in order to get people from point A to point B.
I'm interested in overcoming the anxiety part of that triangle. And what went through my mind is, so is the answer to make people more anxious about not changing than anxious about what they're losing? Because it sounds like scaremongering, but I think that's what
it's a really balanced and nuanced dance. So anyone who's used an accommodation booking site would have seen this. So what do they do in order to get you to change your behaviour from not booking the hotel to booking the hotel? They create anxiety about what happens if you don't. Other people are looking at it. It's today's value deal. You'll never see this deal again.
3 rooms left.
3 rooms left. So they give you tension about not proceeding with the change. But what else do? They neutralise any anxiety you have about committing to the action. So that is free cancellation. Other people have made this booking, so we trust this hotel. It's today's value deal, so it was priced here, but this is how good the value is. So within even an accommodation booking site, that's a microcosm of behaviour change. Same concepts when we're trying to change any individual's behaviour. It's this positive tension, negative tension dance.
Yeah, and the other thing I wanted to ask about is often I think that is a hidden barrier. So often I think people don't say what I'm anxious about. So they don't actually say I'm anxious about not meeting my financial plan. They talk about 14 other things rather than missing their targets. And have you got any tips about how to bring that truth out so that you can then address it?
You can almost anticipate that it's going to be there. So a lot of what I do is getting away from asking people because back to the say versus do gap, they will say, and I used to have this when I was doing a lot of business cases, your numbers don't look right or your numbers don't stack up. As anyone in this room probably knows, well maybe I shouldn't make reference to this room particularly, you can make Excel do anything. Your numbers can look like anything. What was underneath it, if I had known these techniques at the time, I could have anticipated there would be anxiety about what this new business case means for their business unit. And so I can anticipate what are people going to be nervous about here, and the 2 strategies to overcome anxiety: give them nothing to fear. So what assurances can you provide? So if you do this new behaviour, you're not going to lose your job. And the second one is to give them something to fear for not changing. So if you don't make this change, life is going to be worse for you.
But to do that, you have to name the fear in order to address it. There's an interesting phenomenon that goes the other way here. It was revealed in the literature in the late 80s, and it was called the moral muteness of managers. And what it found was that people would have an ethical reason for doing something, but then would pretend that they didn't. So they'd feel that it was the right thing to do, but they'd dress it up as, oh look, this is essential for the bottom line, or it's key to our strategy. They just wouldn't be willing to say that they felt this was right because they felt it would be embarrassing and contestable. So the language even was starting to be marginalised as a result of that.